Speaker.
Chairman, the chair of the committee. Okay, Mr. Chairman.
The Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union has under consideration H.R. 3080 and pursuant to House Resolution 385, I report the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
I'll read this now. The chair of the Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union reports that the committee has under consideration the bill H.R. 3080 and pursuant to House Resolution 385 reports the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered and a separate vote demanded on any amendment to the amendment reported from the Committee of the Whole. If not, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of substitute as amended. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The question is on the engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to provide for improvements to the rivers and harbors of the United States, to provide for the conservation and development of water and related resources, and for other purposes.
All right. The question is on the passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
Gentleman rests for the yeas and nays. The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. It's a 5-minute vote.
And it's a final passage vote on the Water Resources Bill, which would reauthorize flood control programs, navigation, and environmental restoration projects by the Army Corps of Engineers. The Associated Press points out the bill is coming up for a vote 1 week after a bitterly divided Congress ended a 16-day government shutdown and averted a first-ever default on the federal debt. This should be it for legislative work in the House this week. They will be in tomorrow noon Eastern for a brief pro forma session. Also in tomorrow, the Energy and Commerce Committee meeting to look at the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. They will hear from a number of the health care law's top contractors. That hearing getting underway tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. We'll have it live for you here on C-SPAN.
yeas are 417 and the nays are 3. The bill is passed without objection. The motion to consider is laid on the table. Of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal, which the Chair will put de novo. The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it and the journal stands approved.
The House will come to order. The House will come to order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute for the
Without
purposes
objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I now yield to the Majority Leader, Mr. Cantor, for the purposes of informing us of the schedule for the week to come. And I yield to my friend, Mr. Cantor.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Maryland, the Democratic whip, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the House will meet at noon for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business. Votes will be postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday and Wednesday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour and noon for legislative business.
The House is not in order.
The House will be in order. Members, please take your conversations off the floor. The House will be in order. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last votes of the week are expected Wednesday afternoon. Mr. Speaker, the House will consider a few suspensions next week, a complete list of which will be announced by close of business Friday. In addition, the House will consider 2 bipartisan bills from the Financial Services Committee, H.R. 992, the SWAP's Regulatory Improvement Act, authored by Representative Randy Holmgren, and H.R. 2374, the Retail Investor Protection Act, sponsored by Representative Ann Wagner. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I appreciate that information. I would simply observe, Mr. Speaker, I'll have a couple of questions of the Majority Leader, that last week we did something that was, I think, critically important, and we did it in a bipartisan fashion. We made sure the government was open, and we made sure that America pays its bills. Today, in an overwhelming bipartisan fashion, we passed a Water Resource Development Act, which will, as I heard the Majority Leader saying, and I said as well, will be helpful in growing our economy, growing jobs, and investing in America's growth. I would simply observe that there are other things, Mr. Speaker, that I think we could act on in a bipartisan fashion as well and be successful in seeing enacted, which would make a real difference on behalf of our country. And I would therefore, Mr. Speaker, ask the Majority Leader whether or not there is any thought about bringing to the floor before the end of the year the immigration bill, and I would yield to my friend for the purposes of a response.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman for yielding and would respond by saying that I think the gentleman knows that both the Speaker and I have said that we are not going to consider the Senate bill because we object to the Senate bill, although we do want to make some progress in reforming our broken immigration system. And there are plenty of bipartisan efforts underway and discussions between members on both sides of the aisle to try and address what is broken about our immigration system. The committees are still working on this issue, and I expect us to move forward this year in trying to address reform and what is broken about our system. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for that information, Mr. Speaker, and I would say that, of course, the Senate has passed a bill in an overwhelming bipartisan fashion, an immigration bill, and if in fact we bring an immigration bill to the floor whether I vote for it or not, and we move that bill through the House, that will give us an opportunity to do what my Republican friends, Mr. Speaker, have been talking about, negotiating, sitting down, talking, going to conference. And I think that will be a step forward. We are on this side of the aisle, very, very strongly in favor of moving immigration reform. We are obviously hopeful that the budget conference that has been convened will reach an agreement. We hope that it will reach an agreement, frankly, before Thanksgiving, so that we will not again have to address on a crisis basis either the keeping of government open and funding of government for the balance of the fiscal year, but also ensuring that we do not have another time when we come very close to not approving the payment of our bills by what ought to be the most creditworthy nation on earth, and I think is the most creditworthy nation on earth. So I'm pleased to hear that information. Mr. Speaker, let me ask the Majority Leader as well whether or not he has got any information which might lead us to having some confidence that we might have progress on the conference on the Farm Bill. And I yield to my friend, the Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman. And as the gentleman knows, the conference committee has been appointed. It is meeting and anticipate productive discussion on the Farm Bill and the reforms that the House voted on in both parts of the bill, all parts of the bill, and hopefully look forward to resolution on the differences between the Senate so that we can produce yet another bill that can be signed into law. And I would just underscore the fact, Mr. Speaker, that talks and negotiations are, yes, the way to go about trying to accomplish more for the American people. And along those lines, it is about trying to focus on the things and the beliefs that we have in common, not allowing those things that we disagree on to get in the way. And if that spirit of negotiations is adopted by both sides, I believe that there could be progress on the Farm Bill as well as other issues. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I think Mr. Cantor and I are in absolute agreement if both sides take that attitude that we can make some progress, and hopefully that will be the case. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to ask the Majority Leader. The Majority Leader has said, I've said, Hal Rogers, the Chairman of the Appropriations Committee, has said, and others have said that the sequester will not work, that the sequester will in fact undermine the ability of America to invest in its growth and its opportunities and its ability to compete globally so that we can create jobs here in America. The Majority Leader has made an observation, Mr. Speaker, that the sequester he didn't think was the way to go, and I share that view, and I share very strongly the view of Mr. Rogers that in fact the sequester could not be implemented in a way that was consistent with the interests of our country. So I want to ask the Majority Leader, Mr. Speaker, whether or not he shares my view that the conference, focusing on what we can agree on, not what we disagree on, that the conference, one of its objectives should be replacing the sequester with a formula that gets us to a place where we are bringing down our expenditures, but at the same time making sure that we protect the mandatory expenditures that Mr. Ryan talks about and others talk about to make sure that our most vulnerable in America are protected, and that we do so, frankly, before Thanksgiving, Mr. Speaker. I'm urging the Majority Leader to hopefully take that course so that we do not confront a crisis once again prior to Christmas, when we're scheduled to adjourn for the Christmas and Hanukkah and holidays, but also preclude coming into the 1st of January with the deadline confronting us and disrupting the confidence of our people and frankly, people around the world. And I yield to my friend.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman, and I agree with the gentleman that it is desirable, and I look at it as a priority that we allow for the process of the appropriations process to begin again, but that will require us to arrive at an agreement on what that top line number is, as the gentleman knows, as a former appropriator. And we have said and maintained all along on the majority side of the aisle that the sequester is not the best way to go about achieving spending reductions, and I have said continuously that we would like to exchange for sequester mandatory savings and put that into law in exchange for the sequester. And there are items in the President's budget that we agree on as well. That goes to my point, Mr. Speaker, of working and focusing on things that we have in common, things that we believe in common, and leaving aside those things that we disagree on. The main item that we disagree on in these discussions has been higher taxes. The Republicans and the majority in the House do not believe we ought to raise taxes, and we will not go about raising taxes in exchange for sequester relief. What we want to do instead is to allow for sequester relief and put into law mandatory savings that in the long run will exceed the kind of spending reductions that are in the sequester. They're smarter reductions, they make more sense, and will allow us to provide, as the gentleman said, for the needs of those who are most wanting in our society. It will allow for the defense of our country and will put us onto a path of fiscal sustainability. But, Mr. Speaker, again, it takes us focusing and limiting our discussions to those things we have in common, and I believe that's the best way forward. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comment. Mr. Speaker, we have two bills. The Senate bill, which was passed some 6 months ago, and the House bill, which was passed about 6 months ago. We've been hoping to go to conference during those past 6 months. That hasn't happened. We are now going to conference. That's a positive step forward. And my belief is that the conference will discuss both the Senate's bill and its priorities and the House bill and its priorities. And we'll come to a resolution, hopefully, on a compromise so that we can get from where we are to where we need to be. I'm not going to get into a debate at this point in time. At some point in time, that will be appropriate with the gentleman. We seem to hoe this road a lot. But the fact of the matter is we ought to look at those who have made recommendations, worked on this, to figure out how we can get from where we are to where we need to be. Without going further into the specifics, let me ask the gentleman if he can give our members, we've talked about next week, if he can give our members some view of his thoughts on scheduling and subject matters for consideration for the balance of the year. I know we talked a couple of items, but if he could give us some, I know members are interested in what their planning should be for the balance of the year, which is coming up pretty soon. And I yield to the Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman for yielding. And as we just discussed, we expect there to be a Farm Bill Conference report that we'll consider here on the House. We'll also look to consider items dealing with our domestic energy supply and the ability for us to maximize the indigenous assets and resources we have here to increase our competitiveness as a country for investment, for job opportunity, and to increase the standard of living for all of working middle-class Americans as well as all Americans. I would also say to the gentleman, if the Senate acts in time, we look forward to a conference report on the National Defense Authorization Act, as well as various provisions that expire at the end of the year. Obviously, we have SGR and some other things that will expire that we'll have to take time to deal with. Obviously, we maintain our focus on the rollout of Obamacare, Mr. Speaker, and our committees will be hard at work trying to understand exactly what is going on with the sign-up on these exchanges and to once again assert that it is only fair that all Americans are treated equally and fairly under this law as is expected under every other law. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and of course he's going to find out, I'm sure, over the next few weeks, the overwhelming interest that Americans are displaying in getting health care opportunities and access to affordable, quality health care. Unless the gentleman has something further he wants to say, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the order of the House of January 3, 2013 regarding morning hour debate not apply tomorrow, and when the House adjourns on Thursday, October 24, 2013, it adjourn to meet on Monday, October 28, 2013, when it shall convene at noon for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise as a member of the Safe Climate Caucus to address the important issue of climate change. EPA reported some good news today. Carbon pollution from power plants has dropped 10% from 2010 to 2012. Some of this drop was due to fuel switching from coal to natural gas, which is less polluting. Some was due to increased energy efficiency, and some was due to growth in clean, renewable sources of electricity like wind and solar. Our challenge is to continue these reductions. Market forces alone will not be enough. The Energy Department says that carbon pollution has crept up this year as coal prices fell and usage increased. That's why we need the new regulations proposed by EPA to limit carbon pollution from new power plants, and that's why we need limits on pollution from existing power plants. The history of the Clean Air Act has shown us we can have both a strong economy and clean air. Our health, our environment, and our economic prosperity depends on developing the clean energy technologies of the future.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio rise?
To address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in tribute to our former colleague, Congressman Major Owens of Brooklyn, New York. Major and I were elected in the class of '98 and had the joy of serving together for several decades. He was a fighter for learning, perhaps the first librarian ever elected to the Congress of the United States. And he came from Brooklyn, far from where I live. But his predecessor, Shirley Chisholm, was the only member of Congress that in our first campaign came to campaign for me, and I shall never forget that. Major was a social critic. And he was a voice from a Brooklyn that I only imagined as a child, with the Brooklyn Dodgers, the old Ebbett Field torn down, the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles, and baseball changed forever from a human institution where the players came from that region to an enterprise where they were traded like chattel. Major understood the difference, and the work that he did here, whether it was fighting for learning, fighting for libraries, fighting for jobs in America, for the training of workers, in a very measured way. He had a poetic sense about him, coming to the floor many times in the evening and delivering some of his handwritten lines. Through his work, both for Brooklyn and for our country, he helped to build a better America, and he left us a better place for his service. I wish to extend to his family and to his former constituents the deep sympathy of the people of Ohio. He was an honest man and an honorable man, and it was a great privilege to serve with him those many years which seem just like yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
The gentlelady yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
To address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I had the preeminent privilege of talking to the Honorable Barney Frank just recently, the former chairperson of the Financial Services Full Committee, and he called to my attention a speech made by the Honorable Maxine Waters, who is now the ranking member of the committee. This speech was a keynote speech at the launch of the Global Financial Governance and Impact Report. This is a very insightful message accorded by the Honorable Maxine Waters. It's in fact a critique of the World Bank, the IMF. She goes into the global sovereign debt restructuring issue, and she talks also about the problem of growing inequality. I would invite anyone who is interested in learning more about what I call the Waters Worldview to peruse this document. Chairman Frank was eminently correct when he suggested that this might become a part of the congressional record, and I will place it in the record tonight. I thank you for the time, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Adderholt of Alabama for today until 4 p.m. and Mr. Rush of Illinois for October 22nd and 23rd.
Without objection, the requests are granted. The chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to 22 U.S.C. 3003 and the order of the House, January 3, 2013, of the following members on the part of the House to the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe.
Ms. Slaughter of New York, Mr. McIntyre of North Carolina, Mr. Cohen of Tennessee.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Obamacare debacle continues to unfold, there's more and more that is absolutely staggering that is now coming out. People in America need to understand who shut the government down September 30th, October 1st. The House of Representatives had voted out first a bill to completely defund Obamacare because we could tell. Many of us have read it. I read it before I voted no. I could see it was a disaster waiting to happen. The real Americans would be really hurt. So we offered a compromise. All right, this obviously, pursuant to notice by Democrats themselves, was a train wreck, nightmare. It was not ready for prime time. So we actually gave Democrats in the Senate and in the House that pushed it through without a single Republican vote, and the President himself, an easy out. Because that's, you know, if you really want to get something done, unless it's Obamacare that you want to, that America knows is going to be harmful and totally against, or at least over half are against, unless you're going to do something like that that is really totalitarian and against the will of the American people, it's good, Chinese proverb notes, to give adversaries a way out. We gave a way out for Democrats in the House and the Senate that passed Obamacare without Republicans. We gave a way out for President Obama. We said, okay, here's a compromise that ought to be an easy agreement. You know, we'll give you money that you're demanding with a gun to our heads, namely the shutdown. And all we ask is that you do the right thing for America and suspend the implementation of Obamacare for a year. Clearly it's not ready now. Harry Reid, maybe he consulted with the President, surely he did, before refusing to let that go anywhere. So we did what people are not supposed to do in a negotiation, continue to compromise against themselves. I didn't think it was a good idea. We should have waited for the Senate to vote on something. Something. Do something. Because being in a legislative body requires more than just saying no, 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 which the majority leader in the Senate did. Nonetheless, our Republican leadership decided we would compromise against ourselves yet again. All right, if you don't want to suspend the whole thing for a year, at least do for individuals in America what you are doing for big business. Big business, basically, as set forward in Obamacare, was anybody with more than 50 employees. And yet, again, Harry Reid, the President, were a no on the compromise that would have just suspended legally suspended the mandate forced upon individuals that they're going to pay higher taxes, a fine of $95 or 1% of their income, going up to 2%. But that was going to be implemented. They were going to be penalized, or as Chief Justice Roberts rewrote the Obamacare bill and called it a tax after he called it nothing but a penalty. So Americans were going to get hammered. We could see that. At least we implored the Senate and the President, give individuals, Americans, the same break you have now basically illegally given to big business by saying, yeah, the law says that, but we're just not going to enforce it for a year. Why not do that for individuals in America if you'll do it for big business? Why not? It's the fair thing to do. And once again, it gives a legislative opponent a way out. It gives you a back door. You say, well, okay, we're caving in. We're going to allow the individual mandate to be suspended for a year like the President did, legislating from the executive office. But again, the answer was no. And in response to Majority Leader Reid's no and the President's no, the President, of course, had called people to the White House later on after the shutdown and made clear to the leaders of the House and Senate, wanted to make clear to you, I'm not negotiating. Give me my money, raise my debt ceiling, and then maybe we'll negotiate. Later on, in essence, it was, give me my money, raise the debt ceiling, you'll be amazed at what I'll be willing to negotiate once you give me everything I want. And so it was indicated yesterday by the administration, gee, there's a possibility we may have to delay the individual mandate. And then an article today from Jen Wisner. The title of the article, Obamacare mandate may be delayed. Official says deadline to have insurance could be postponed. The article says the Obama administration may give Americans extra time to sign up for health insurance under the Affordable Care Act, postponing when penalties for failing to buy coverage will go into effect, MarketWatch has learned. Further down it says the administration declined to say whether people who purchase health insurance late in the enrollment period, say on March 31st, would be exempt from a penalty, even if their policy doesn't kick in until April or May. Nor would the department give a specific date by which people would need to buy coverage to escape a fine. The HHS, or Health and Human Services official, however, indicated that the administration may extend the deadline beyond February 15th. Quote, "We are exploring options currently and will issue guidance at a later date." The article at MarketWatch.com goes on to say, the potential extension comes as the federal health exchanges are under fire for ongoing technological problems that are making it difficult for some people to enroll. The Obama administration has so far resisted GOP pleas to delay the requirement that individuals purchase insurance next year, but has lately expressed frustration with the technical difficulties. Those problems, perhaps the elephant in the room during deadline discussions, may influence a decision to provide an enrollment grace period to avoid fines. There's another problem that the penalty policy, or as rewritten by our Chief Justice, the tax policy, may be in flux. While Health and Human Services referred MarketWatch's previous inquiries about the fine and the deadline to avoid it to the Treasury, a spokesperson there referred a request Wednesday back to Health and Human Services, suggesting that the health officials are now the ones writing new rules for the law. For this administration, for Democrats in any part of this body or at the White House to even consider out loud suspending the 1 year, for 1 year, the individual mandate is absolutely outrageous, and it exposes, clearly exposes, that there were games being played in Congress, and it wasn't by Republicans. It exposes that people knew there were problems with Obamacare, with the websites. They knew that Americans were going to have a nightmare, and were having a nightmare, and even trying to get online and review different policies. And they didn't care. Just as, obviously, there were people in this administration who could have changed the policy. They didn't care about the veterans. They can say now, oh yeah, we had a policy that World War II vets were going to get in, or people that were utilizing their First Amendment rights. Well, I was there the first day. There wasn't any mention of that. Those barricades were connected across in front of the World War II Memorial, across in front of the Lincoln Memorial, across in front of the Martin Luther King Memorial. There were barricades, for heaven's sake, on the road that just made a loop around the Iwo Jima Monument, the U.S. Marine Corps Memorial. They were out to make things as difficult as possible. Apparently, at least as early as Thursday before the shutdown the following Tuesday, plans were being made to gather barricades. There was an indication at one point some of them may have been rented. We still hadn't gotten to the bottom of where they all came from, where all the cones came from to interrupt people's lives around the country, as this administration sought to make it as difficult as possible on Americans, as one park ranger indicated, that it was disgusting, the park ranger is reported to have said, but we've been ordered to make things as difficult for people as we can. Well, they were doing a good job. So for them anyone in this administration, anyone down the hall, anyone in Congress to now think about, gee, maybe we should suspend the individual mandate is an outrage. It tells you that there were people in Congress and there were a lot of people down Pennsylvania Avenue who had no consideration for the American people. They were out to score political points. They didn't care. They wanted people to hurt and to suffer so maybe they could win the majority in the House next year. And American people began to see through this. And when the next to last compromise of a compromise continuing against ourselves was to suspend the individual mandate for a year, there was no excuse for rejecting that. Senate should have at least voted that through. What an incredible turn of events for this administration now to say, yeah, we're thinking about suspending the individual mandate. You have got to be kidding me. Nothing could make it more clear to the American people that games were played with a shutdown, and it wasn't by Republicans who kept compromising against ourselves, but it was with the people who kept saying no, 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 no. And then the last thing we did the night before things really shut down was say, okay, under the law, the rules, here's our conferees. You appoint your conferees. We'll have this worked out hopefully by morning before people even realize there's a shutdown. And once again, the answer was no, no, no. Obviously, people wanted, at the other end of the hall, and the majority wanted the government shut down. And I would expect that in the future, if someone were looking for a modern-day Marie Antoinette, who reportedly, in response to the suffering of the people in France, had said, let them eat cake. So out of touch, if that were actually said, so out of touch with the suffering of the people. Here's an article by Susan Jones, CNS News, cnsnews.com, and it's dated today. In an interview with CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta Tuesday night, Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius said she won't be enrolling in the problem-plagued health insurance system that she was charged to implement. And this is her quote that she told to CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta, quote, this is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. This is the person who is charged with implementing Obamacare. This is the person who is charged with overseeing Obamacare. This is the person who has been given by an overreaching, oppressive Obamacare bill. She has been given the power over people's lives, over their health care. There's nothing more personal than that. This person, who will have so much control if she's still in office at full implementation, says this, quote, I've created an account on the site, talking about the Obamacare site. I have not tried signing up because I have insurance, unquote. Mr. Speaker, you had insurance. I had insurance. We had the same policy that every federal worker in America had the chance to have. There are a number of different policies you could choose from, and the federal employees handbook, the Federal Employee Cafeteria Plan, as they call it, a number of different insurance policies with private insurance. We had insurance just like Secretary Sebelius has now. The difference is that this bill, this oppressive, government-controlled Obamacare business, took our health care insurance away. There's been a lot of confusion in America about whether or not members of Congress are under Obamacare. We are. We have, as of December 31st, we will have lost our insurance. And I had a health savings account. Not totally thrilled with it. Doesn't work like it should. There are some glitches that need to be worked out, but I had a choice. I could choose to have a higher deductible, as I have, and a health savings account that I would manage. But Secretary Sebelius had authority to take that away, and she did. So she says, gee, I have insurance. Well, so did I. So did all of us in here. Mr. Speaker, so did you. But an oppressive, overreaching Congress took it away. And those Americans were promised over and over and over, if you like your insurance, you can keep it. That promise has now been broken millions of times to Americans. People were told, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. That promise has been broken probably millions of times to Americans. The arrogance when millions and millions of Americans are having their insurance taken away from them, having to get different insurance, having to pay higher deductibles, having to pay higher amounts for their insurance, the arrogance to come back and say, I'm not going to get insurance under Obamacare, I already have insurance. That takes a lot of unmitigated gall. Might as well say, let them eat cake. I cut my insurance. Let them eat cake. Maybe people want a different Health and Human Services Secretary as a result of the horrendous job that was done in preparing this rollout. But I would think the head of Health and Human Services, to have this kind of arrogance, should not remain in the position with an attitude like that. It'd be like the president of American Airlines refusing to fly on anything but United. In the real world, people would care so much about their own product. That's what they'd use. They'd be embarrassed to refuse to use the product they're forcing on others. Airlines aren't forcing their products on us. This is being forced on us. And the one who's in charge of the forcing is too good to have Obamacare insurance. Now, the difference was that the Office of Personnel and Management had said or put into law something that wasn't in the law, and that was that members of Congress would continue to get have the federal government, which is taxpayers, paying for over 70% of our monthly health care costs. We pay a little over a third, well, actually not quite a third, and the government pays over two-thirds. Taxpayers pay over two-thirds. So OPM had issued an order that that could continue even though the law didn't provide for it. I've indicated I'm not going to accept that. Likely I'll be paying a fine unless the individual mandate is suspended for a year. Just to indicate how bad this rollout is, this is from the Washington Free Beacon. Headline, HHS finds 2 enrollees for pro-Obamacare ads. Ad claims website is very easy to use. This is by Elizabeth Harrington. Says new advertisements promoting Obamacare by Health and Human Services claim healthcare.gov is, quote, very easy to use, unquote, despite a flood of reports about glitches and a dearth of users being able to actually access the site and purchase insurance. President Barack Obama held a press conference on Monday in defense of his health care law, saying it is, quote, not just a website, unquote, which has been under scrutiny for its disastrous rollout since October 1st. Coverage of the site has been largely negative, with pundits and reporters alike at news outlets from the Washington Post to the New York Times to the Los Angeles Times noting the problems with the website. However, Health and Human Services is out with new ads touting its success. For heaven's sake, we ought to have a law against the government lying to the American people. We ought to start with a law like that. The new ads feature 2 individuals who have received media attention for beating the odds to sign up. This, quote, the site was very easy to use, and the customer service representatives were patient and helpful, unquote, she said. The woman was identified online as Deborah Lealisis, 54, a self-employed grant writer who has written grants for HHS. Well, how about that? One of the 2 people in the ads that they were able to find to talk about how wonderful Obamacare website was happens to write grants for HHS. How about that? See, back when I was a judge and Chief Justice, we would call that evidence that could be used to impeach her credibility because of that link with Health and Human Services. She has a direct interest in promoting how good things are at Health and Human Services so that she could potentially get favorable treatment. That's what you'd call it in a court of law. And in the court of public opinion, reasonable people might be embarrassed that all you can find is somebody who has a pecuniary interest in promoting HHS. But this article points out her process for enrolling was not as smooth as the ad suggests. According to the Associated Press, Lealisis was only able to create an account before the website crashed on October 2nd. Quote, as a grant writer who does a lot of research on federal websites, Deborah Lealisis was impressed by how easy it was to use the new online insurance market that launched Tuesday until it stopped working, unquote, the report said. Quote, they're telling me the system is down at the moment, unquote, Lealisis said. She told the Washington Free Beacon that enrolling took several days. Quote, on the first day, I was only able to register for an account, but 2 or 3 days later, I was able to submit an application and enroll, unquote, she said in an email. She said her experience with healthcare.gov was primarily positive. I expected some technology glitches in a rollout of this magnitude, particularly on the first day when the site was flooded with reporters, as well as individuals trying to enroll, she said. Lealisis appears to be one of the few who have successfully enrolled in New Hampshire. An Obamacare navigator tried to sign up 45 people during the first week, but she wasn't able to enroll anyone online because of the glitches, according to the Concord Monitor. Lealisa said she does not recall who contacted her to be in the video for HHS, only that, quote, I believe I was approached for the video to share my personal story, unquote. A second HHS video features Daniel McNaughton, who was the only person able to sign up for health insurance during Obamacare's first week, according to the Orlando Sentinel. McNaughton said in his ad that with healthcare.gov it was pretty easy to shop for insurance. Quote, I already had health insurance, but I just wanted to see if I could do a little bit better on the health insurance marketplace, and I did, unquote. Quote, once I was on the site, it was pretty easy for me to compare plans. I was able to pick a much higher quality plan because of my income as a student. I only pay about $70 a month for it, unquote. Well, the article goes on and says, on Facebook, McNaughton posted a link to the plan he signed up for, which includes a $3,000 deductible, which doubles to $6,000 out of network. McNaughton, a 22-year-old male, will have maternity care covered, which is an essential benefit mandated by the health care law. It's another great thing when the federal government decides to create a one-size-fits-all. Single young men must pay for maternity care for themselves. Because he only makes $15,000 a year, McNaughton is eligible for a subsidy. Will pay about $70 per month, according to the Sentinel. McNaughton is one of the few Floridians who have successfully signed up for Obamacare. The Miami Herald calls enrollees, quote, urban legends, unquote. He was one of only 2 people found by the Herald which solicited readers for stories of enrollees in the first weeks after the launch. That's weeks, plural. Quote, nearly 2 weeks after the federal government launched the online health insurance marketplace at healthcare.gov, individuals who have successfully used the choked-up website to enroll for a subsidized health insurance plan have reached a status akin to urban legend. Everyone has heard of them, but very few people have actually met one, unquote. Pretty sad, but that's what happened when the federal government takes charge of people's personal lives. Here's an article from National Review Online. Andrew Johnson, an Iowa City man, may have the distinction as the Hawkeye State's first Obamacare enrollee, but it didn't come easy. Edward Voss, a computer programmer, told the Des Moines Register he had to try more than 100 times before he was ultimately able to sign into healthcare.gov. Voss said he didn't know whether or not he had actually enrolled in a plan until Co-Opportunity Health, one of Iowa's 2 carriers in the exchange, called him on Friday to congratulate him for being its first enrolled customer. Even though he was eventually successful, Voss criticized the website for resembling one from the 1990s, saying it was one of the worst he's seen. He recommended that the administration consider shutting the site down for at least a week in order to address the problems. Quote, it's hard to fix things while you're up and running, unquote, he said. That's rather amazing. But over 100 times to sign up. I guess he probably got maternity care too, that individual young man. All right, here's an article from CNS News dated today, this afternoon, by Ollie Meyer. Just the first line says, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, also the speaker who helped push through Obamacare without any Republican input or votes, and who famously said, we'll have to pass it to find out what's in it. This article says she admitted Wednesday that the Obamacare website is, quote, beyond glitches, unquote, adding that, quote, somebody should fix it, unquote. Well, it seems to this person speaking that the somebody that should fix it should be led by the former speaker who shoved it through this House without America's support, without any Republican support, and without having any clue what was really in it. That's somebody that ought to work on fixing it. Another article from National Review Online by John Fund. Hopefully you wouldn't mind me calling him a friend. The No Excuse administration has a whopper of an excuse for Obamacare. President Obama told the nation there's no excuse for the disastrous rollout of the health care exchanges that are central to Obamacare. But that didn't stop Kathleen Sebelius, his Secretary of Health and Human Services, in overall charge of the project, for making excuses in a CNN interview with Dr. Sanjay Gupta yesterday. She claimed to Gupta that President Obama hadn't been told of any potential problems prior to the launch of the exchanges on October 1st, a dereliction of duty any way one defines it. But there was also this startling explanation of what went wrong at HHS. Quote, we talked about having testing going forward, and if we had an ideal situation and could have built a product, you know, a 5-year period of time, we probably would have taken 5 years, but we didn't have 5 years. And certainly Americans who rely on health coverage didn't have 5 years for us to wait. We wanted to make sure we made good on this final implementation of the law. Well, okay, she only had 3.5 years since Obamacare became law in early 2010 to oversee the design of the exchanges and the website accompanying them. So now she tells us she needed 5 years. Bruce Webster, a noted IT consultant to many companies, is stunned that Sebelius thinks, quote, that we needed 5 years but only had 2 is somehow an excuse for this disaster. That's like Boeing saying, we know the plane crashed, but we needed 4 years to build it and a year to test it, but we only had 2 years. Color me boggled, unquote. Bureaucratic bafflegab like that was probably behind yesterday's White House announcement that it had, as Bloomberg reported, tapped former acting Office of Management and Budget Director Jeff Zients to work with the team overseeing repairs to the Obamacare website. Zients was named last month as the director of the National Economic Council, but his arrival there will now be delayed as he takes on his new Sisyphean task. It's pretty clear that the White House has, as bureaucrats say, minimal confidence in Secretary Sebelius to deliver a functioning health care exchange system, but I'm told that for now, her job is safe, because firing her would prompt cries from liberals that she was the scapegoat for mistakes made by higher-ups, such as her boss, who signed the legislation creating this mess and then failed to hire the proper people to ride herd on its implementation. It also brings back to mind, through this disastrous rollout of Obamacare, for which Republicans here in the House, Speaker Boehner leading, he actually did a favor with our consent to say, here's a way out. You want a CR, you want a continuing resolution to just keep getting the same amount, massive amount of money. You want the debt ceiling raised to who knows what. Look, we'll do that. We'll give you an out on how bad Obamacare is. Let's suspend it for a year. When that didn't work, let's suspend the individual mandate. That gives you an out and allows us, you know, to postpone some of the harm that's going to come to America from Obamacare. And they still said no, shut the government down for over 2 weeks, hurting Americans, refusing to provide death penalty benefits to the family of fallen warriors in combat, even though they had the power under the bill we passed before the shutdown, making it as uncomfortable and difficult for people as possible, all the while when they were given an out by Republicans. Just suspend it for a year. It's an out. It helps America. It saves grief for America for a year. They wouldn't have it. Now, I know some have said, well, the problem the administration's in is, gee, if they actually postponed Obamacare for a year after so many have already lost their insurance, you know, there's no alternative. There's nothing we could do. Gee, what would anybody do? They've lost their insurance. Well, this is just a suggestion, but I bet we could get people in Congress, a majority. I can't imagine there wouldn't be friends across the aisle among our Democratic friends who would agree to this as they see how problematic Obamacare is for Americans. And knowing that people think that federal employees have had this gold-plated health insurance policy is okay. I had better before I came here. I had better before when I was in private practice. But given where we are, there are private insurance companies that have provided insurance policies for what's called a cafeteria-style group of choices. So every federal employee in the country before Obamacare could say, read through the thick handbook and say, okay, I've studied the different insurance companies, the different plans, the different costs, and this is the one I choose, or that's the one I choose. How about if we, for the next year, 2 years, give America a break? Let's say any health insurance company that's part of a federal exchange or a state cafeteria plan or a local government cafeteria plan, we make those available to anybody. If it's a local plan, anybody in that area. If it's in the state, anybody in that state. If it's in the federal plan, anybody, any insurance company in that plan, or any insurance company that wants to offer the same type coverage for the same price. Let's offer to every American across the country the same private insurance choices that federal employees have until Obamacare kicks in. But let's give them all of the choices that we had up through this year. Just say we'll suspend Obamacare. Yes, Mr. President, yes, Harry Reid, you shut down the government for over 2 weeks to make life difficult for Americans when you didn't have to. But we're more interested in helping Americans. So how about a compromise plan that just says, hey, why don't we let Americans across the country choose from any of the federal choices we had before Obamacare, any of the state choices, local choices, and you could allow employers, since the President's suspending the business mandate, whether there are more than 50 employees, less than 50 employees, Let them choose for those. If their employees choose the policy and the employer wants to pay for part or all, let them do that. Let's give them another year before we force them under the iron hand of the government. Let them choose from any of those, from private insurance companies. Let them make the choices federal employees had until Obamacare. And, you know, it's would still take away the problem of the pre-existing condition because the market would be so wide, the people signing up would be so numerous that it could afford to take care of that. Want to leave people on that are 26, heck, I don't care, 28. Normally people in their 20s are in good health, so, you know, let them stay on. We offered to agree to a bill like that before Obamacare ever passed. But the Democrats were so insistent on their way, not the highway, but their way, period. And now 3.5 years later, we see the consequences. Well, we ought to have unlimited amounts if you got a health savings account under a federal plan, state plan, local plan, or if you're an insurance company that provided the employer insurance plan and the employer wants to continue that next year, even though it's already been canceled, if the health insurance company wanted to re-extend that, let that be part of the agreement during the suspension period of Obamacare. Let's allow people to put pre-tax as much as they want to in a health savings account, understanding once it's in there, it can never be used for anything but health care. I have a fear there'd be people that might accumulate over the years 80, 100,000. Well, I don't care. I'll pay 40, 45% penalty and interest. And, man, just think I could buy 2 or 3 good bass boats for that. But we couldn't allow that because it's too important for people's health. Once that money's in a health savings account, it can never be used for anything but health care. And let's do what Ben Carson suggested. And let's start encouraging young people to have a health savings account. Let's do that. Those that are in Medicare or Medicaid can stay there. If they have the wherewithal to sign up under one of the plans, the federal options that federal employees have had until Obamacare passed, let them do that if they would rather. But still, they'll be in Medicare, Medicaid. Let's suspend the hurt that's being done to Medicare through Obamacare. Let's suspend the hurt that's being done to young people that really shouldn't have to pay for, if they're a young man, single, until such time as we have a pregnant young man in his 20s. Let's don't make them pay for maternity care. No need on it. Just when you think it couldn't get much worse, you know, then we also find out the NSA, this is from the Washington Free Beacon, dated today, this afternoon, the NSA spied on 124 billion phone calls in 1 month. And that's the people that want to run our health care, the federal government. An article from the Washington Times from this afternoon today. House Speaker John Boehner predicted Wednesday that by the end of the month, more Americans will have lost their insurance by being kicked off existing health plans than the number who were able to sign up for the flawed online healthcare.gov website. And the early numbers may back him up. A massive number of people have now gotten their notice that they've lost their insurance or will effective January 1st. Here's an article that's on the Breitbart website, but it's talking about a CNN story. CNN, Obamacare site doomed, riddled with security dangers. And this reports that today on the CNN Money site, there is a terrific story about the problems surrounding the Obamacare website. The story includes all kinds of new information from a host of experts. Most of the news is flat out terrible. $500 million site needs to be rebuilt from scratch. The site has an unwieldy 500 million lines of computer code. It took just 500,000 lines of code to send a rover to Mars. And that code of Obamacare is riddled with security holes that could result one of the biggest breaches in American history, quoting from CNN. That article by John Nolte, staggering. State exchange enrollments, mostly Medicaid, not private insurance plans. This is another story at Breitbart by Dr. Susan Berry. Defenders of President Obama's signature health reform legislation claim the states that put effort into establishing their own exchanges, mostly Democrat-led, are signing people up successfully for Obamacare. A new report, however, indicates most of those individuals signing up in these state-run exchanges, they're actually enrolling in Medicaid. Pretty disingenuous. And just as you think you can't stand any more about the federal government, they're in your bedroom, your bathroom, your kitchen, all into your private life. We'll have your medical records. They'll be giving them to navigators who are not thoroughly vetted, that they'll keep it secured. It'll be put online where people are saying it's a dream for hackers to steal personal information. Just when you think you can't take anything more in the way of bad news, here's a story from the AP today by Stephen Olmacher of the AP. The headline, 700 IRS contract workers owe $5.4 million in back taxes. Kind of reminds us of the old Secretary of the Treasury, Timothy Geithner. He signed 4 different documents certifying, basically swearing that he would pay, if he would be given all of the money as an independent contractor instead of having money withheld. He certified, he absolutely was swearing that he would take care of paying his taxes, and he didn't do it until he got nominated to be the Secretary of the Treasury. As one Treasury employee told me privately, she didn't want to make it public because she didn't want to lose her job. If an employee of the IRS were to have done what Timothy Geithner had done and not paying taxes he swore he would pay, they'd be fired on the spot at the IRS. Of course, that was before Lois Lerner and her crew weaponized the IRS so they could go after conservative groups. So, anyway, it's bad news when it comes to Obamacare. But, Mr. Speaker, like I say, we offered repeatedly to agree. In fact, we didn't just offer, we passed the bill that would allow Obamacare to be suspended for a year, where, if possible, get its act together. It gave an out to the President. President Harry Reid could have said, well, those Republicans in the House, we didn't want to do it, but we needed a continuing resolution to keep the government going, needed the debt ceiling raised, and so we went ahead. We had to. They had us over a barrel. We agreed to suspend Obamacare for a year, and, gee, those pesky Republicans made us do it. That's a political way out that they had that we gave as Republicans in the House. We extended as a gift. We passed it as a House bill, extended it as a gift, gave them an out. That would have given them an extra year to try to get the act together. But, oh no, they were more interested in scoring political points because they knew the mainstream media would give them cover, would blame Republicans 100%, even though it was 100% not Republicans. It was the people that refused to even appoint conferees and try to work it out before the shutdown really took hold. It was the Democrats who refused to agree to just suspend the individual mandate. And the compromise before that, suspend the bill for a year. They wouldn't even do that. And how sad for the mainstream media that the best question about Obamacare and the horrendous rollout of its website was not asked by somebody at the ABC, CBS, NBC Evening News, but was asked by Jay Leno after finding out, that the president said, we're putting our very best people on fixing this website. In essence, Jay Leno asked an entirely appropriate question. Wait a minute, talking about our own health care. Why wouldn't you have put our best people on starting the website instead of waiting till it crashed so miserably? And the answer is unknown, but the American people deserve an answer. Are you so intent on having the federal government take over people's private lives, most personal medical secrets, that you would force this horrible health care system upon them? I'm certainly willing. I bet you we could find a majority in the House, and if Harry Reid would let it come to a vote in the Senate, they would say, okay, well, let's suspend it for a year. Come on. And during that time, maybe make it 2 years. During that time, everybody in America, every employer, you either get your insurance back if the insurance companies will do it, and if they want, get private insurance that we used to have as part of our cafeteria plan for every federal employee in America. Let Americans choose from that. Don't force these Obamacare exchanges on America. Let them choose like federal employees have done. Let them choose. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pay brief tribute to a patriotic man devoted to the military, devoted to seeing that the military had what it needed, devoted to America. C.W. Bill Young will have his funeral tomorrow in Florida. He was 82 years old. There have been plenty of tributes written about Bill Young. Be many more written, many more spoken to tomorrow, and I look forward to hearing those at his funeral. But there's nothing that could be said that could surpass the witness he was to who he was. Talked to him numerous times. Sometimes I had questions. Sometimes I had points to make. When I had questions, he always had time. He was always honest, completely honest, very sincerely honest. He was a kind, decent, honest man. We miss when we lose a kind, decent, honest man. Bill Young, you'll be missed. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman have a motion?
This time, Mr. Speaker, I would move that we do now hereby adjourn.